Good evening and welcome to Resource PNG. Glad you could all join us once again. Tonight we featured two high-profile executives within the business sector of Papua New Guinea. They play a role with either leading a huge organization or give advice based on research and the experience that anyone involved in the development of this nation would love to take note of. And this will be Mr. Ian Klein, the CEO for Bank South Pacific, and Paul Bakker, the Executive Director of the Institute of National Affairs. To start off, here is Sweta with Mr. Ian Klein.
Good evening. Today I have with me Mr. Ian Klein, the CEO for Bank South Pacific. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on this Resource PNG program. I'll be your host for today. Mr. Klein, would you like to address the audience and let us know about what do you think are the immediate challenges for BSP, especially as Papua New Guinea is facing an economic boom in the activity of resource sector?
Well, as we all know, Papua New Guinea is an exceptionally lucky country through our natural resources. And one of the challenges we have as a country is actually many of these projects are still not delivered. And there is a huge expectation in the community about the royalties and the benefits that are coming. However, PNG first has to deliver LNG to give the country the type of credibility we need. And on the other side, after 2014 first gas, that's when the country really starts to generate income. And the challenge for the country is one of infrastructure, because with all these projects, these companies, they need access to electricity, to roads, to power. And whilst we're already challenged today with these future very, very large projects coming up, PNG simply must find a way to invest in very much needed infrastructure, not just for these projects, but for the people at large.
Very rightly pointed out are the infrastructure and expectation challenges for the country, which leads me to the next question, Mr. Klein, is what do you think are the initiatives taken by BSP in implementing banking facilities to meet the resource sector demands?
BSP is the largest bank in Papua New Guinea. Clearly we are the large Kina lender. So many of these projects, when they're first financed, are financed in US dollars. But when the real challenge about taking banking up into the rural communities and resource communities occurs, then really BSP is the one with the capability and today actually the technology to deliver. We've been talking to Exxon for over 2 years about putting a bank up in the Hides area. Unfortunately, one of our competitors, who is a lead arranger, shall we say, used some influence. And they are putting one up there, but in reality BSP is prepared to go up into these regions. But the type of banking service we will take should reflect the true economic activity of that region, because you can't build a massive branch in a very remote area which costs many millions of kina and of course lose money.
Mr. Klein, you rightly touched upon technology as the key factor, and I would like to lead you to as a more detailed is what is the technology initiative or ICT initiative of BSP to meet this demand?
BSP has been through 3 years of transformation. What I would describe BSP as being 3 years ago was perhaps a 1980s bank in a 1980s economy. So we have undertaken massive number of projects. In fact, in 2011 we had 183 projects going on, and if you look at the BSP of today versus what we were 3 years ago, it's a massive change, and a change that many people would not have expected. Part of that change is linked to technology, and the country as a whole has benefited from Digicel, from improved telecommunication availability, and therefore there now are creative ways that a bank like BSP can actually take cost-effective banking truly into rural and resource communities. And that's using mobile phone banking, wireless FPOS, ATMs, etc., because that is true cost-effective banking. And one of the big challenges we have in this country, of course, with law and order, are the risks of moving cash. And BSP's strategy very much is taking electronic banking into rural communities. In terms of technologies, in the next few months we will be coming out with some truly innovative technologies. We have done a pilot with Octedi. We went down the Fly River in their boat and we used a tablet computer to open accounts in very, very remote areas. So we're now able to open accounts within 10 minutes in very much rural and resource communities, and therefore take cash out of the equation. We're also running a pilot up outside Kokopo with Agmark, where commodity buyers are actually using wireless FPOS, and the growers have BSP Kundu accounts, and when they sell their product, they're immediately paid using a wireless FPOS real time.
That's a fantastic initiative of BSP using creative technology to take it to the rural sector, which I would like to ask you further on this, Mr. Klein, is how do you, what are your plans of educating the financial investors of the rural sector, of the sectors which are remote from here, as they land in a community using BSP?
Well, every major sponsor of a natural resources project has the #1 obligation of local content, of giving back to the communities in which they operate. So BSP is working very much with the likes of Barrick, Exxon and Newcrest and all of these companies on how do we take real banking services into the communities. And we have container branches, as I say, we have wireless FPOS. So we are working to see how we can creatively go in, and in terms of education, once you have access to a banking facility, that you use your Kundu card. We have put together material, and we're working with the World Bank amongst others for educational material to go out there and teach people about basic banking.
Stay tuned, we'll head out for a break, but when we come back we have Mr. Ian Klein up next. Welcome back, and if you have just joined, you're watching Resource PNG. We continue on with the interview with Mr. Ian Klein, the CEO for BSP.
Now I'll take the conversation to a different domain in terms of investor relations. We would like our audience to know as what is the percentage of BSP investors that are directly involved in oil, gas and mining sector?
Well, BSP's major shareholders clearly are IPBC. They continue to have 18% of BSP, and BSP pays a very, very large dividend every year to IPBC, and that goes back to the government. The majority of our shareholders are the super funds, NAS Fund, #1 Super, Credit Corp, MRDC, Kutubu Landowners, PNG Sustainable Development. All of these institutions have a role to play in basically resource areas.
Excellent. Mr. Klein, you have a fantastic Go Green campaign which we see around the country. Could you please highlight your motivation or your initiatives of BSP towards going for this campaign?
Well, some years ago, BSP unfortunately had quite a violent robbery in Biala, and it was on my first Monday as CEO. So it was quite shocking in terms of what occurred. We had a number of meetings with the communities, and what came back was the perception that BSP was not part of the real communities in which we were operating. So we sat back, we do listen. Of course, we're a very large organisation, so we sat back and we thought we need to give back to the community. And, you know, people can talk about fees and these issues, but a fee is a cost of providing a service. So we came up firstly with our social branch project, where we give 20,000 kina to each branch. BSP staff actually have to participate in the work that's done, and it goes through a very professional approval and monitoring process. And in 2 years we have delivered over 70 community projects to branches all around the country. Then we were looking at, of course, the issue about environment. We want to have a very healthy environment for our children and for the youth, for the future of this country. And as the Green Bank, we signed up. We are the Pacific partner of Clean Up the World, which is a very big organisation run out of Australia. We do our school cleaning and community cleaning projects, but we do many, many more. The former Miss PNG, Rachel James, is very active on environmental. She's around the country giving lectures in schools and to groups. And so we have a very, very clear campaign. It is just not one-off in terms of once or twice a year. It's actually ongoing. And we also have the same campaign within BSP to look at how we do things and can we do them in a more environmentally friendly way.
And that's a fantastic approach of taking your initiatives to the community and giving it back to the community, as you rightly said. Would you also highlight about, our audience would like to know about the Lay Oncology project or one laptop per child project, which initiative BSP has taken?
Well, the Lay Angau Hospital has been the recipient over a couple of years of our community projects. This year our 3 branches in Lay have pooled their resources and we are doing a complete renovation in the cancer ward. You know, I think as has been seen from the press, this is extremely well received, and there are many companies like BSP, like Digicel, Exxon, who are giving back to the community, but BSP, as obviously one of the larger and leading companies, truly believes that we must lead by example. In some of the other projects, because obviously I have seen the list, we are doing up health centres in very remote areas, we're doing up classrooms, we have police stations, so it's a very diverse range. And we also do this not just in Papua New Guinea, we do this in the Solomon Islands and Fiji.
Excellent. Mr. Klein, you briefly touched in your conversation about the container branch aspect of BSP, which is of particular interest to us. Could you please highlight for our audience as what this initiative is about?
Again, when I took over BSP about 3.5 years ago, we had a one model serves all service model, and people would complain about crowding and lines and waiting times, etc. Because we really didn't look at each customer segment and come out with a strategy on how to serve them. And when you look at the retail, of course, mass market, we have now 780,000 accounts in BSP. And if people are just going to line up at a branch, we can't service them. So this is why we've now been very aggressive in ATMs. We have 230 ATMs around the country today. We have nearly 5,000 FPOS around Papua New Guinea, and our strategy is to roll out these in a far more aggressive way. And as I say, even putting them into the main trade store in remote villages. And this is a commitment the BSP is already delivering. When we looked at the branches, you know, many people in Papua New Guinea are low-income earners, and when someone comes to our teller, we actually lose 4 kina per time we serve them, because the cost of maintaining 38 branches, 20 lose considerable amount of money, is very, very high. If you look at the history of the PNGBC, how they expanded their branches, often perhaps a provincial governor would like to have a very large building built in a town. They would come to the PNGBC and say, would you please build one, and then they would, and finance it, of course, and then they would come back and say, could you rent it? So we have some very, very large branches which are actually exceed the size of the economic activity in that town. So what we're doing, we've created a container branch, and the first one is in Motokia, which was our pilot. So the idea is we will look at expanding our branch network, but we will first put in a container. And the container will then, we will look at the business volume. If the business volume exceeds the container needs, and we're talking about 2 or 4 40-foot containers put together, then we will build a more permanent branch to reflect the activity. If it is smaller, then we will perhaps move the container and we'll put in BSP Rural, because we now have a BSP Rural strategy. Today we have 10 rural branches. By the end of this year we will have 40 BSP Rural branches around Papua New Guinea, and we hope to have 100 agents around Papua New Guinea. And so the idea with the container branch is we can put one in quickly. In fact, we have 3 being built at the moment, so we have some flexibility. And once we clearly need the community support, because law and order is a massive issue for everyone, all the community, but of course if you're taking 80% of the money around the country, law and order for BSP is one of the things we deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah. Stay tuned, we'll head out for a break, but when we come back we have Mr. Ian Klein up next. Welcome back, and if you have just joined, you're watching Resource PNG. We continue on with the interview with Mr. Ian Klein, the CEO for BSP.
No, fantastic. 780,000 customers for BSP and 40 odd branches in the country is a very significant economic impact of the country, which brings me to a very significant question which probably could be of direct impact to you, as the S&P has very recently downgraded the credit rating of PNG, and have BSP being the biggest and the largest influence on the economic community. How do you foresee that to be an effect for the PNG economy?
Obviously, I'm not here to talk about the political issues. They are what they are. But unfortunately, internationally, what has occurred in the recent months will cost Papua New Guinea hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions, in terms of increased risk premium. So Standard & Poor's are one of the major international rating agencies. By downgrading Papua New Guinea, that means that the risk premium that companies and international banks have to put on their interest margins, if they do lend into Papua New Guinea, will go up. So in reality, we may say that there's been limited real impact, and all of us know, how Papua New Guinea is. However, internationally, this has been exceptionally damaging, and I cannot understate just how damaging. And so when, for example, WAFI, which is a fantastic project, I believe without doubt it will happen and it will get financing, but the interest rates that the international banks will charge on that project have gone up. And so the real cost will come to PNG, because Papua New Guinea now has to pay a far higher risk premium to the international banks and to international investors. Again, everything is about risk premium. There's a difference between perceived risk and real risk, and we all here believe what has happened is clearly not as major as the international press has made out. But perception is everything, and I'm very unfortunate to say, but this is and has been and will take many years for PNG to get over.
Yeah. Now, high interest and high risk is something which affects all of us each day, but that brings me to another very important question regarding the Kikori branch, and this is a very recent groundbreaking facility which was officiated in the Kikori to build a banking facility there. Do you think BSP would be interested in such an investment in the Kikori area?
Many of these types of smaller opportunities, I get back to my comment on whatever goes there has to reflect the economic activity and the true economic activity. That's why you need to go in a smaller way to see what the real business is, because there has to be law and order. As we know, Kerema very unfortunately suffered from a number of bank robberies. There were not enough investment in the road infrastructure and infrastructure needed to make sure that people could travel safely. How we actually came up with BSP Rural is a similar type situation. I read one of the newspapers, and there were some people coming to Port Moresby to do their banking, and unfortunately the boat capsized and several drowned. And I thought, how sad that people in Papua New Guinea are losing their lives to come and do their banking. So we recruited Paul Thornton, probably the most experienced microfinance banker in Papua New Guinea, and Paul and I sat down and came up with BSP Rural. We came up with a very aggressive FPOST strategy. Now, Kikori has come across my desk. It is an issue with the main international sponsors, because when you look at some of these other projects, just doing day-to-day retail banking for the community, to put a branch in costs between 2 to 3 million kina. And it's very difficult to generate from a small branch just to cover your costs. We have to put staff there, we have to have accommodation. We have done 96 cash deliveries around this country in 2011 for a cost in excess of 4 million kina. So it really needs the sponsors, whether that be Interoil, whether that be other international companies, to come up and say, well, BSP, we want to work with you, or the community leaders, as happened with our Laba rural banking that we announced last week, where the local community have paid 50% of the construction, and BSP will go in there in a joint way and manage it. But clearly either the provincial government or the national government or these major sponsors must come and help BSP, because we are privately owned, we're publicly listed, we've got by far the largest branch network, even though 20 of our branches lose money. I wouldn't be aware of any privately owned company in Papua New Guinea that keeps 20 shops that are losing money open. And I'd have to say sometimes it's a little frustrating, but sometimes I feel BSP really doesn't get the credit for the amount of effort that we are truly making. But then again, the silent majority is probably supporting us. So in terms of Kokori and many other projects like that, it needs the major sponsors to come up, and you know, the other banks around have less than half the branches, and the reason they have half the branches is because of the high cost of doing these services, especially when you take security. So they just really want to bank the corporates. They want to do the corporate business with the foreign exchange, which to a banker is like the cream on your coffee. We like to have it, but for BSP, we actually go and do the hard yards. We actually go into the community, and you can't do this overnight. So if a major sponsor of these projects, because there is a national content issue, and BSP is Papua New Guinean. So, you know, if they come to us and say, look, we'll put some of your, some, not all, but, you know, enough of your corporate business and your corporate FX business to BSP, obviously we will be competitive, and that helps subsidise these types of operations. And of course, you need to get the provincial government and the national government to come forward and say, well, you know, if we have a robbery, we will help BSP, because we can't put our staff